Go. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today in our last session of the International School of Radical Relationism. And I want to say, Huayjo Huayte, Monica Sanchez and Squete, Mexico City, Stequen. And I just said in Shikwetmetzin my name and where I am from. And also to start us in a good way, I want to acknowledge that I am joining this session from the beautiful lands, never surrendered, unceded, which really means stolen lands of Tekemlupste Shekwetmek in Shekwetmek Uluk. And I want to give so much honor and gratitude to the original stewards of this land, and also say that territorial acknowledgements, we do them to remind us of that violence of colonialism within which we live. And today, especially the 8th of March, remembering the International Women's Day, important also to recall so much violence and still today being lived with the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and how this is still going on all over the world in many, many settings, and so important for our work to decolonize our work, ourselves, our minds, our institutions, the places where we live, what we do. And it is a constant and forever labor of love that we engage in. And this School of Radical Relationism engages in this work. And today we are going to speak about radical relational pedagogical innovation and epistemology. Today our three discussants are Zoltan Lakatos, Jenna Woodrow, and Melody Devries. In that order, they will be doing a brief presentation each on these topics of pedagogical innovation and epistemology from a radical relational perspective. So I understand you have slides. Zoltan, if you would like to start us off with showing your bit, and we can get started. Thank you, Zoltan. Will you introduce yourself and take it away? You're muted, Zoltan.
Can you hear me okay? I
Yes.
needed to unmute myself first. Yeah. Let's go back to sharing the screen.
The joys of tech.
Yeah. Joys of. Is it okay?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Looks good.
Okay. So thank you, Monica. My name is Zoltan Lakatos. I'm from the Budapest University of Technology and Economics, which is basically an engineering school, but the first of this kind in the world, because it was established toward the late 18th century as the first engineering university in the world. And we have a huge, the biggest faculty actually at this university is the Faculty of Economics and the Social Sciences, which is weird, but that's how I got a position there. So I trained as a sociologist, and the title of my talk is Radical Relational Pedagogical Innovation Epistemology. So switching between the slides. Cool. I'm going to draw on the pragmatist tradition by stressing that we cannot really teach anything because it's always the students themselves who do the teaching, self-teach, provided they are intrigued. And our job, I think, as instructors, is to merely put them in an environment when learning becomes a matter of course. So at the end of the day, we are here to provoke them, and provoke them in a good sense. Now, let's convert the question, how does one learn this or that, into how or why one doesn't end up learning this or that? Because that's the challenge for us, I think. What is it about some situations where we think that our students should learn, yet they don't really? Now, I'm going to illustrate this with language issue with Hungarian, which is my native tongue. But there's a caveat. This is a non-representative observation just based on decades of personal observation. So as a reminder, Hungarian is not an Indo-European language. You see the branches of this language family called Uralic. 97% of Europe's population speak languages that belong in a single language family, which is Indo-European. Now, Hungarians are among the 3% who don't belong in Indo-European, together with Finns, Estonians, speakers of various other Uralic languages, plus the Basques and the Maltese. So Hungarian is said to be overly difficult for adult speakers of Indo-European tongues. Now, those expats who learn Hungarian and learn it well include a lot of Americans, whereas those who fail to learn it at all include a lot of French. So what is going on? Americans go about it naturally. They don't go to courses. They just engage in the fabric of life. They're not embarrassed by errors, clumsy phrases, and so on. Contrast this with the French approach to language, to learning a second language, which is, I would call it scholastic. They emphasize the formal aspects, learning grammar, taking courses, only speaking when able to pronounce the correct sentences. This is a fixation, and it prevents them from learning. So, how do you learn a language naturally? That is, not even knowing that you do the learning. There's no pre-given, essence-like ability to learn a language beyond what everyone is born with as humans. So learning like not learning a language is the outcome of what one does, and conversely, what one doesn't do. This brings us to sum up the pragmatist approach. Learning is always, inevitably, is the outcome of inquiry, and one does inquiry when habitual patterns are interrupted, and inquiry is natural. It's not something that can be forced. Now, the neoliberal university's mission is the mass production of marketable skills for the corporate workplace. Students are supposed to be competitive, striving toward enhancing their earning power, and do personal branding and all sorts of related things, you name it. And under this paradigm, the financialization of higher education is not even a worry. And this is a quote from Chicago school economist Gary Becker, who died 10 years ago. It goes like this: despite the rapid growth in tuition, college education remains a very good investment for the large majority of students who graduate from college, unquote. With the mission of higher ed turned into enhancing earning power, students are in fact discouraged from engaging in inquiries. Sanitized rituals involving teaching toward the test, rote learning, and the like reign supreme. Neoliberal academia is focused on the recipe. You will want to go to the college with the best recipe for material success. Hence, its fixation on metrics, especially rankings. The medium, Habermas would say that the medium becomes more important than what it actually mediates. Also, I think we've all noticed in our practice that in student evaluations of classes, being able to earn the credits on the basis of merely reading slides, PPT, Prezi, whatever, is increasingly emphasized. Needless to say, all this is very substantialist. So now, we all know it's not only us, but also students who suffer from neoliberal academia, because rote learning, metrics obsession, testing abuse, PowerPoint fixated teaching, etc. put a stress on everyone. So scores of students may be put off when our class is not doable from sites only, but the majority will feel frustrated and demotivated toward the end of any degree where this paradigm dominates. So how do we get students interested in stuff that flies in the face of the comforts of neoliberal academia? The following observations are from my classes. Most of my teaching is in MA, where class size, is smallish and there's room for experimentation. And I can only bring up scattered illustrations, classes where my attempts at being relational, radical, and also radically relational or relationally radical appear to have worked. Now, to the illustration. This is a case study filed under Outdoors and Mystery. And the title of the related MA class is The Political Economy of the Media. The focus is framing, and the class is based on 4 case studies. 1, the Olympic industry. 2, the media framing of poverty. Then the Arab-Israeli conflict, and finally the Iraq War. And the common thread uniting these 4 case studies is racialization. By which I mean how the mass media racializes the poor, the non-white, and the non-Western. And to illustrate how hostile coverage of outgroups works, we went on a hike to the site of a mass murder, which you can see here. This is Budapest, the capital of Hungary. To the north, we have this hilly, beautiful nature park area, and this is the Danube River taking a southward turn. This region is called the Bend of Danube. Okay, so to give some historical context, in August 1947, 7 young men were murdered in the hills to the north of Budapest. There was indication that the murderer was an officer escaped from the Soviet army, which was then occupying Hungary in the wake of World War II. There was no serious investigation, and the case was blamed on ethnic Germans. German citizens of Hungary who happened to be ethnic Germans. And these ethnic Germans were portrayed as Nazi sympathizers. And the case was used as a pretext for expelling more than 200,000 ethnic Germans from Hungary, which the government of the day ended up doing. So our class did a hike to this murder site in the hills. Again, the purpose of was to study coordinated media efforts to scapegoat an entire outgroup. The reference is ethnic Germans in Hungary after World War II, but there is a parallel, which is also important: Muslims and Arabs today. So the student and crucially, the students were kept in the dark as to the destination and the theme of the hike. They were only told that we would be visiting a site of interest in the hills, and the theme and the destination were only revealed once we got there. It's a remote, isolated site surrounded by hills. It nonetheless helped that the region is beautiful, the site is eerie, and it was also the finest day of the winter in December 2022. Now, in the end, what we did was learning by doing. There was mystery involved. None of the students knew what was going to happen. And frankly, the site is scary enough to get everyone in the mood. So this trip made it easier for students to understand that with professional propaganda, any outgroup can be turned into enemies, because that's what is currently happening to the media portrayal of Muslims and Arabs all over Europe. So, and further considerations were phone detox, and physical exercise. And from then on, since the fall semester of 2022, 2 out of my 3 master's classes have included a hike. And the rationale is the same: connection to the course matter, B, destination and theme only revealed once we've got there. Also, there has to be a dramatic aspect to it. Mental activity and exercise go hand in hand. And finally, but not last, get them off their phones. Now, the difficulty is that these trips require the full day, meaning it's only possible during the late completion period, by which I mean the week before the exam period when they don't have classes anymore. And this program only works because it's unique, which is to say no repeat is possible. And also the students know this in advance, so I will have to constantly look for new themes and destinations. So this uniqueness, this not being able to repeat the trip, is a challenge. I need to find new themes and destinations beyond the watch out. So in the end, I start seeing opportunities in nature that I wouldn't have thought of otherwise, which is to say, it's not only the students, but also myself who is stepping out of the comfort zone. And in a similar fashion, for this upcoming trip in June 2024, for another class of mine titled The Theories of Social Communication, we will be visiting a site of a barrage project in the Danube Band, pictured here in black and white. This is a project that was abandoned in 1989 after successful popular mobilizing, organizing, the kind of organizing which proved to be a precursor to the political transition in late 1989, early 1990. So it's going to be an opportunity for students to learn about the public sphere and make more sense of Habermas. Again, no student has a clue what we will be doing on this upcoming trip. And to wrap up, now, of course, this hike your way to learning is not an invention at all, because, of course, the outdoors have always played a role in education. Yeah, it's less common to keep the theme and destination secret until arrival at the scene. What matters here is learning as disclosure. Martin Heidegger understands truth as aletheia, the Greek word for disclosure, unconcealment, revealing, opening. And he contrasts this aletheia with doxa, doxa being taken for granted, unquestioned beliefs, the neoliberal recipe, as it were. What I'm trying to say in the end is that relational pedagogies are all about unconcealment, a process of inquiry. Thanks, and I yield the floor. Jenna.
Thank you so much, Zoltan. And now Jenna is gonna share her slides.
Despite Zoltan having gone ahead of me, I made the same mistake as he did in not unmuting first. Everyone. Jenna Woodrow and Squest te Kutuak or Esquin. Hello, everyone. My name is Jenna Woodrow, and Kutuak is where I'm from. And today I'm going to be, I guess, diving in along with Zoltan and Melody about radical relational epistemologies and pedagogies. And saying that, it's a big old mouthful. And so I wanted to right away shift gears. So what my plan today really is to be exploring some just fundamental shifts in perspective from a Cartesian to a relational model of knower-doers and touch on a consequent pedagogical project. But as I was saying, we see radical relational epistemologies and pedagogies. It's such a mouthful. And I wanted to, let's go ahead here. Oh, sorry, right away, go towards a different way of capturing all of that, which is with the Shkrapmachine word, Kispaltkanus. And I know there are better people at pronouncing that. I'm a bare learner of not even a learner yet of this language. But what Kispaltkanus means is that we're all related and interconnected with nature, each other, and all things. And today, what I want to do is explore the fundamental shifts in perspective from that Cartesian model to a model that really centers the interconnection of all things. Before I do that, I did want to just do a little positionality statement. I am a white cisgendered woman of mostly settler colonial ancestry. And I'm here living, working, playing, raising my children, trying to do good in the world through philosophy on the unceded, never surrendered territories of the Tk'emlúps Shkrapmik in the Shkrapmik Uluch. And my grandmother, Beverly Campbell, grandfather, Horace Baudouin, grandmother Timothy Kay, and grandfather John Woodrow, and my parents Louise Baudouin and Keith Woodrow, who you see here, are all from Tiohtià:ke, which is colonially known as Montreal, in the territories of the Abenaki or Wabanaki Confederacy. You see the map in the background there. And I'm from, as I said, the high Arctic in northern Quebec. And as I said, I live, work, and play on these lands, and my people, here we see my older daughter Lachlan and my younger daughter Saya. They were both born and are being raised on the Tk'emlúps Shkrapmik. So when they kind of go out into the world and when they introduce themselves, it'll be these lands that they refer to as their homes and the lands and the peoples that raised them. So I did want to acknowledge with gratitude the lands and the people. Okay, so now to something that's intimately connected with this way of introducing myself and the content is through relationships. And I did want to start off, because I'm a philosopher, I wanted to start off by highlighting a contrast. And so here I have an image of René Descartes, and I wanted to talk a little bit for maybe people who aren't as familiar about what that Cartesian mind is. So the Cartesian view of the knowing self has dominated metaphysics, ontology, and epistemology, and therefore has dominated pedagogy. On that view of the mind is individual, it's disembodied, it's simple, it's elegant, and it's unified. The res cogitans, excuse the Latin, it means the thinking thing, or the thinking substance, I mean, is essentially individual. I think, therefore I am. Is kind of the heart of the argument for that hyper-individualism, as well as the heart of the isolated nature of the knower in the modern pedagogical sense. But the knower is also fundamentally disembodied, right? It's a res cogitans, it's essentially a thinking thing, and it is only accidentally connected to its own body, and therefore fundamentally disconnected from nature. The other fundamental thing, just to want to keep in mind here about the contrast class, is that the Cartesian mind is unified and entirely indivisible. And I've got this beautiful image, I think, of Humpty Dumpty to symbolize this indivisible facet of the mind. Okay, so I'm going to go to Maxine Sheets Johnston, who calls the Cartesian view of the mind a, quote, 350-year-old wound generated and kept separating by a schizoid metaphysics. These antiquated epistemologies and metaphysics have given rise to pedagogical approaches that are insular and ostracizing, and they contribute deeply to the ongoing harms and violences of colonialism in particularly academic institutions. That is the harm that they continue to populate and re-perpetuate, not only in the ways that we're teaching the topics of say, philosophy, as well as sociology, I'll throw you under the bus too, mainstream-wise, but also in the very ways in which students are conceived, curriculums are developed, and pedagogy is enacted. Okay, so I wanted to, as I said, shift gears to the Secwepemc concept of mind, a Secwepemc concept of being. Now, I see this, and I'm a newcomer here on these lands, and so I wanted to, thank and give honor to all the people who've taken the time to try to teach me about this way of knowing and being in the world. But what this essentially means, this Gestaltgenuss, is that reality isn't an object, but a process of relationships. And Secwepemc ontology is actually the equivalent of Secwepemc epistemologies. In Indigenous epistemology, the relationship with something, a person, an object, is more important than the thing itself. And the purpose of knowledge is not the artifact of knowledge that you get to put in your mind and walk around with. It's rather the good in the world that you can do through acquiring that knowledge. So it's fundamentally embedded in that notion of being interconnected with one another and in nature, in the world. So we're not beings in relationship with other people or things. We actually are the relationships that we hold and are a part of. So it's on this alternative conception, we are social, gendered, embodied, inactive, complex, really messy, fragmentary, leaky, plural creatures who are truly of our world and not just accidentally embedded in it. So now I'm going to shift gears a little bit and pull from some other Indigenous epistemologists, some feminist cognitive scientists, and look at the ways in which minds are essentially social and only derivatively individual. And then I'm going to shift gears and talk about a project that tries to reify these. So on this view of knower doers is fundamentally relational. We are essentially social and only derivatively individual, right? And that's a key point to keep in mind for later on. To import some cognitive science terminology, the minds of knower doers are embodied, gendered, and inactive. And this view of knower doers is fundamentally relational. We're socially constituted brain-body world ensembles, right? That's what we are, that are actually act as extended cognitive circuits. If you'll forgive the metaphor, that's what we are. And these engendered embodiment in a social world is constitutive of perceiving, knowing, and doing. Knowledge, then, it arises through a dynamic interaction between acting people and their environments. So we have bodily structures and activities are essential parts of information processing and information organization. So just for example, from inactivist literature, we tend to think so much of the mind and the brain as authoritative. But one example, which I really love, is the ways in which our bodies are made to do the things that we do. So let's go to a local example, which is the salmon. So the salmon has been so made that the salmon body has been so made that even a dead salmon can actually swim upstream, right? Now, what is the lesson that I want to draw from that? Not that we're all dead salmon, but that the ways in which we ignore our embeddedness in nature, and our embodiment in nature really serves to to make us ignore essential parts of cognition and essential parts of the learning and teaching relationships, which are our bodies. And just shout out to Zoltan. I think that walking really is one of the ways that we're manifesting that embodiment. Another example is the control of finger motion, which lots of people used to think was primarily a contribution of the mind, the nervous system. But we actually now know that it involves complex and actually essential contributions from networks of linked tendons. And just final example that philosophers of mind are really concerned about is about qualia, about the qualitative feel of things, and particularly experiences. And there I want to go to the softness of a sponge. And this might seem so obvious to everyone, but philosophers of mind have been concerned about it for decades, if not for longer. The straightforward answer to that question of qualia is that the softness of sponges consists in the particular way in which the sponge actually yields when it is squeezed, right? Sorry, I'm just trying to put the sponge in the view here. So the Cartesian eye is nowhere to be found in this distributed nexus of knower doers. So that's the bit of the background. And now I want to talk about the particular project that I am co-lead on that tries to animate this alternate conception of knower doers into a pedagogical context. So the project is the Arts Cohort Project. Terrible name, my apologies. But this art cohort project really does try to take those lessons into mind. So what it involves is a fundamentally relational approach to the entire process of teaching and learning. So faculty are cohorted and spend a year together developing relationships with one another, as well as developing a cohort of faculty members that center on pedagogical innovations and professional development. And then our students are also cohorted. So we have two sets of relationships kind of meeting together. No one is ever alone, either in their worry about what to do with their classes, or from the professor side, or their worries about being in a class from the student side. Kind of thinking of time here, but the fundamental pedagogical orientation is pragmatic, and that is oriented towards knowledge that serves community. And acted out as much as possible on the land with inactivist curriculum. That is, the students will be creating the class from which they are then learning, the curriculum from which they are then learning. So that is an overview. I tried to keep it clear and succinct and provide an overall view of the ways in which the relational conception of knower doers, the Kiswalt can be implemented in the Arts Cohort Project. We are in year 1 of 3 years, so this is very aspirational at the moment, but that's all I wanted to talk to you about today. Kukshecham, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jenna Kukshecham, for this presentation, and it's really amazing to see all these things taking shape. And then we have Melody, who is also going to present on radical relationism and pedagogical innovation. I'm getting real excited about all this. Yeah, thank you. And take it away.
Thank you. Can you see the screen?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I'm gonna start it off. So big presentations to follow. I really liked both of them. And it's got me thinking about the ways that I can obviously expand my pedagogical tactics. So full disclosure, I suppose, I'm coming into this practice, I feel like relatively new. I just started as an assistant professor here in Pennsylvania in the fall. Technically, I live and work now on the ancestral homelands of the Erie Lahonan, the Haudenosaunee, and the Lenni Lenape peoples. And we're still working on getting schools in the US context to take on an awareness of being in these spaces as part of our pedagogy. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about just how I've been squeezing relationalist thinking into the courses that I've been teaching so far. And only in the hopes, I suppose, of being able to get feedback from everyone as we kind of work to build radical relationalist pedagogies. So as well, I'll note that I'm teaching this from the context of a communication studies department and media studies, but I'm also been squeezing in sociology and anthropology the whole time. So, and that's something that the students have had to deal with. So how do I change the slides? Okay, there we go. So I've framed it kind of in a very simple terms. What can radical relationalism offer undergraduate students, right? The first of these, I have 4, and I'll try to go through them fast, but the number one thing I've found, which is probably pretty obvious to everyone here, is thinking through relationalist theory, I think allows students or gives them a framework to counter essentialist logics, right? And this is something they really click into or hold on to. I think they're very able to recognize this kind of thinking. They're very able to recognize what counts as essentialist thinking. And then that means, I suppose, our job as relationalists is to give them some alternative framework that they're able to work through these questions with, and that they are indeed looking for, despite all the hurdles that stand against them, right? So I guess another question that I've been thinking about, given my positionality here, is what can relational theorizing, as it's injected into pedagogy at whatever level, what can it offer? In particular, the population here is very white, very cis, and coming from small or local conditions throughout the Midwest and the Appalachians, right? How can it help them better understand the intersectional work of oppressive systems, of race and gender, but then also allow them to see themselves located in that matrix via class and consideration of how they've been iterated in this concept of the nationalist state here in the contemporary US. So going back to the slides, I've been injecting these ideas into these courses so far. And so, yeah, so I'll get to talking about other things, I suppose, I find that relationalism can offer undergraduate students. So notably, in terms of how I'm teaching how we should counter essentialist logics, right? I tend to teach this in a very simple structure, which is contrasting essentialist thinking versus relationalist thinking. And obviously, I have to admit that we, as radical relationalists, don't like dualisms per se, but I think that this has worked as one way in for now. Like I said before, they're able to recognize what counts as essentialist thinking, but finding a way to work through relational thinking is what becomes harder, of course, because that's less of what they're used to. So this is one of the slides from my classes last semester, where we contrasted thinking relationally versus thinking in terms of essentialisms. I talk about how it's drawn from this field of relational sociology, and I get them to define what it means to think of something in terms of essences, right? And how we might instead think about the relations between, or the social and technological relations that compose the world. And of course, contrasting this to thinking in terms of essence, or assuming that something is innate or always was there. So I have this exercise for them where I show 2 different advertisements. One is a Dodge Ram truck ad, which I would show if we had all the time in the world, but it's just this kind of hyper masculine, obviously, cowboy-esque, very like black and gray, gritty commercial. And we contrast that with, that's a shot from a Dodge Ram ad. And we contrast that to an ad for a Swiffer, where I think if people remember these from a couple years ago, we saw a woman being literally wooed by the effectiveness of the Swiffer. And when we hold up these 2 very vivid essentialisms, the students in my first year class are able to pick up on this really quickly. And so I found that that's been pretty fun and effective. This is us talking about how essentialisms sell, right? We recognize these essentialist scripts, as that's what I talk about. They feel logical to us. And relational pedagogy here becomes breaking apart that feeling. What is it that's actually evoking that feeling? What are the ingredients that are coming forward to produce what feels normal and natural to you? And so these are some of the questions we end up asking, right? We are mutually shaped by the media we encounter. And we're thinking about shared interactions. And again, here I'm being a dualist and comparing what an essentialist explanation looks like in comparison to a relational explanation, which we see is number 3 here. So I'm just going to, again, fly through these examples that I have here. This is a writing prompt where I have them spot the relations that they're a part of, where they're tasked with thinking about a piece of media that has had an intense impact on you. So kind of getting them to, again, get in touch with their embodied sense of feeling here and think about what made that impact, right? Dissect why it had an impact on you. Try to pay attention to and make visible the features of you that connect up with this media. So in that sense, we're getting them to highlight, the ways that they're coming into contact with a piece of media and that they as people are composed of a specific set of relations that are making the interaction go this way, right? So obviously spotting essentialisms is the first thing that I find that this can offer. Number 2 is also pretty obvious probably, but it's a means of teaching race, gender, and positionality. And this has involved thinking about the concept of standpoint theory as a means of getting them to understand what we really mean by positionality. We investigate the material ways by which gender and race are constructed. And I also find that it really helps teach how race and racialization is this force that is not about, offending others or about, feeling guilty for the past. I find that they tend to get caught up on these things. But when we approach it from this angle of relationalism, we're able to incorporate history and how all of these things have just come together to produce who we are now and the situations that we're in, if that makes sense. So some of the slides that I use for this is I tend to compare the Australian example with the American example and the Canadian example. And this is a difficult thing because what I found here in the US, which is different from my Canadian context, is that the students here have really not heard of residential schools, of boarding schools here in the US, of adoption programs. They haven't heard of it at all. And so introducing them to this context really wakes them up to the extent to which race can be something that was actually planned intentionally to be understood a certain way, right? So I bring up, we have this essentialist understanding of race, right? Race is defined by strict categories of physical characteristics. They're very familiar with this interpretation of race. But then, of course, we introduce a relational understanding that concepts of race are intentionally shaped in relation to social and economic circumstances and the needs and priorities of the group in power. And that works as a way to teach them about the history of their nation, right? And I've heard students be like, I feel lied to after learning this type of stuff, because we end up talking about, manifest destiny and terra nullius concepts. And I find that relational thinking is what enables them to, break apart from this original and essentialist understanding of race to end up having a kind of more even anti-capitalist, anti-colonialist approach to how they're understanding these basic concepts. This is another fun example that I talk about how race can be so fluid and is composed of these really contextual and historic ingredients. We have the case where, Australian Indigenous people are often considered too white to qualify as Indigenous, which works along, these frameworks of eradication. And then we talk about a lot of media examples where Meghan Markle was, of course, too Black to fit into the royal family. So again, just helping them break down these essentialist understandings of what race is, despite them having thought this way for so long, I suppose. What else do we have? I also talk about how, through time, that relations construct our concepts of race and gender. We talk about how race was constructed in the past and how these ideas come forward into the future. We also talk about the coloniality of gender, of course, how gender is constructed, and they find their way in through that. This has also been useful as we address podcasts like Fresh and Fit. There's been this really huge uptake of essentialist understandings of gender. And so this is a way that we get them to think about how essentialist thinking might produce harm, right? What are the implications of understanding gender in an essentialist way versus in a relational way? So that's been helpful as well. I'm just going to kind of jump through here. Also, it helps us to think about our positionality. We talk about what ingredients are composing our positionality. And then, of course, radical relationalism allows us to talk about alternative ontologies and non-human agency. And this I find has been critical for digital media studies. Here we're talking about, the contrast between non-human agency and how we can therefore, shift our attention away from intentions towards the outcomes of various relations. And let's go through here more. This is just essentially another tool that I got them to use in terms of thinking through relations instead of, again, thinking essentially. A lot of times I find that it works to get them to, again, get their body involved in this thinking process. How are they involved in these material interactions? How can they find moments when these material interactions change them? And of course, lastly, I find that radical relationalism can offer undergraduate students the ability to explore radical difference, right? Again, as I noted, since they hadn't really heard of the Indigenous genocides that have happened in Canada and the US, I find that introducing them to that concept of this is what the state needed to do, needed to eradicate these peoples. What does that mean about the threat that this alternative group ontology posed to the concept of the nation state and the hundreds of different essentialist features that have been a part of that, right? So I find that thinking through the concept of relationalism and then radical relationalism allows us to differentiate between, that neoliberalist individualist thinking and non-Western ways of being in and relating to the world that start to stand out for them as alternative ways of thinking about themselves in relation to the things around them. One of the exercises that we have for this is naming features of Western ontology. It's based in solid, hard hierarchies that are racial and gendered. It's based on this concept of the naturalness of competition, the naturalness of morality. And essentially, we turn to qualify all of these as essentialists, as necessary, as non-relational. And then we're again able to unpack what that ends up doing in terms of reinforcing harm and hierarchies and things like that. And another way I teach this is through these two books that you've probably heard of, As We Have Always Done and Don't Sleep, There Are Snakes. Both of them introduce them to, thinking in relational terms and allowing them to, break down, again, their ideas of race, gender, and what it means to be in the world in contrast to the structure that they've always known of liberal individualism. And so just to sum it up really quickly here, this is kind of what I've found so far that radical relationalism can offer undergraduate students, right? The number one thing that I've seen students latch onto is that it can help counter these essentialist logics, then it can help them think twice about them, that it's a useful means of teaching race, gender, and positionality because it allows us to, again, break apart that essence that they're so used to dealing with. It enables us to teach about alternative ontologies and as well non-human agency, right? How do my interactions with media produce actions? How does media have effect on me, and how might that change the world around me? And it also enables the teaching and the exploration of radical difference. And this is something that has been very usefully encoded throughout all of my classes so far. But so I'll skip that because I kind of already covered it. But I wanted to end with like the difficult parts of teaching this kind of stuff, especially in the context of, you know, the ideologies that our institutions are located within, right? So just as, I suppose, as a little case study, people can give me their thoughts and opinions on this. So right now, I've designed a junior seminar that's called Bad Jokes. And it's about how racist and misogynist jokes reinforce systems of power, right? Racism and misogyny. And what I've found is that despite all the ways that students have connected with, you know, identifying essentialisms and locating relations in their lives, they still seem to have a bit of a hard time with locating when jokes specifically cause systemic harm, as opposed to when they might cause personal harm. So what I mean by this essentially is when we're talking about or we're analyzing a racist joke, oftentimes I'll ask them, you know, what is this joke doing? What are the relations that it has with the world? And they get very stuck on who is present in the time of the interaction, who is present to hear the joke, and whether or not harm is done in that moment of the joke telling. And typically they kind of come to the assumption that, you know, as long as we're telling the joke in the context of a group that is okay with it, no harm has been done. It's harder to make them notice the relations that our interpersonal interactions have with reconstituting the world around us. And so to me, this is still a matter of not yet being able to see how the actions and practices of people in the material, everyday, mundane elements of our lives feed up into greater social structures, and how vice versa, those social structures have influenced our mundane habits and jokes and expectations in the first place. So that's kind of the, you know, the point I'll leave off on, apart from my discussant questions. So as mentioned, I'm happy and willing and ready for any and all feedback and to learn from folks who have been teaching this stuff longer than I have. So my discussion questions are, you know, practically speaking, what have been your methods for incorporating relationalism and radical relationism into your otherwise not theory-heavy pedagogy? Of course, we kind of already saw examples of that with Zoltan's presentation, which was very cool, and I want to find hikes now that I can take my students on. That involves, I guess, investigating the area I'm in more. What might hands-on activities or lessons for this kind of content look like? And drawing back to previous conversations, how might radical relational pedagogy become a means of teaching collectivist ethics? So that's a nod to draw back to our conversations previously about compassion and empathy, and if this is something that we should be bringing into the classroom via radical relationalism. And so, yeah, so I will leave it at that. Thank you for listening to my lecture.
Thank you. Thank you. That was three very rich, very amazing presentations that are giving us so much to think about. I'm still processing, and I've taken a lot of examples also for my own pedagogy. I love the hiking example. I love your examples, Melody, the commercials and the jokes and all of that, and also the presentation and the cohort, the arts cohort project, which is so relational. I see that what is it, an hexagon, or is it it's an hexagon, right? The those lessons that have been shared with the group, the cohort that is involved in this project. Thank you so much. I wonder if there's any points or any observations, questions, anything that may come up for you at this point that you would like to discuss with our presenters or with the group in general. We have 12 participants here. Melody, do you have a point?
Yeah, I had a question for Zoltan. I was just wondering more about the practical, what's going on in those moments that you're leading students on the walks. Like, are you allowing them to just walk together, and talk about whatever they want to talk about? Are you like bringing in questions? Are you guiding the thinking or conversations at all? And then how do you end up introducing these sites, especially sites that can be so emotional, like the site of a genocide?
Yeah, emotion. Can you hear me? Because
Yeah.
I switched mics. Okay. Emotional, upsetting, disturbing. There's a basic rule that I've been kind of toying with, experimenting with, is that I, at the outset, I tell them that it's okay to record without asking me, audio, video, anything. It's okay to post stuff on Instagram, on Facebook, anywhere they like, but please do not be online during the hike. Okay. And given the remoteness of the area of the sites we're visiting, it's also impossible because we go past beyond the range of cell towers. So and other than that, I don't really have specific rules whatsoever, other than not telling a thing until we reach the site of interest. And then when we do that, when we reach the site of interest, in the case of the illustration I gave, the murder site, then I start kind of teaching a more formal class, 90-minute class, whatever. We put down blankets, drink some tea, eat cookies, and so on. And of course, there's some back and forth. After 30 minutes or so, I open it up for discussion, and this makes the this is helpful in the sense of establishing a more a less indirect, if not direct, not necessarily direct, but less indirect relationship to this phenomenon of scapegoating out groups, because scapegoating Arabs and Muslims are way too abstract things for the average Hungarian, including also university students. But a lot of us come from a quote-unquote hybrid background. So, for example, I have in my family some of my ancestors were Slovaks from this is to the north of Hungary, and a lot of Hungarians have German ancestors. So explaining to them that, for one thing, your ancestors got to be scapegoated at one point of history, and several thousands of them got expelled from the country. And number two, see also white folks, the whitest folks possible in Europe, underwent this process of racialization, and racialization is not necessarily racializing folks that are not white. So this for some among them, this becomes emotional on the site. And, you know, this is useful in breaking down all the barrier. But coming back to the rule side, yeah, it's a bit it puts them off, and this is also an interesting learning experience for me as an instructor, because I'm looking for the right word, but it's amazing to realize how physically unfit a significant percentage of them are. You know, for them, this is not a difficult hike. So this is not the kind of high mountain climbing program. Nonetheless, and it's the day's trip is like between 10 and 15 kilometers. I'm metric. Okay, so nonetheless, it's a tremendous challenge for at least a third of the class. You know, just walking for several hours on end. And yeah, basically that, get them off their phones. When I succeed, when I'm successful in getting them off their phones, then it's all for the better.
Thank you, Zoltan. Anyone else would like to make a comment, pose a question? Thank you, Chris.
Sure, yeah. Thanks to everybody for really exciting presentations. And this is actually making me think that I need to, when I'm teaching, I'm implicitly teaching relational ideas and approaches, but in my undergrad classes, I don't usually make that explicit. And now I think, oh, I should, why not? So that's wonderful. And I have a bunch of questions. I wanted to ask, maybe Jenna, you're talking a lot, you're bringing in Indigenous knowledge into your presentation. I was curious about what's the relational process through which you've gathered a fluency in that knowledge, and do you talk about that with students now? So
yeah, that's a great question. So I think the relational process is deep and thoroughgoing. So from I guess from my undergrad, I started my undergrad in Indigenous philosophy, with mentoring relationships with Leroy Little Bear, among other very well-known and respected Indigenous epistemologists. And so I think I learned philosophy and Indigenous philosophy at the same time, right? And so I'd say they're friendships as well as mentorships all the way through, with a little pause when I did my PhD, which is, you know, maybe ironic, but my PhD was very much at Dalhousie University, looking at the problem of epistemic, epistemic justice, right? So from a philosophical perspective. And then since I've been here on these lands, so I didn't have a chance to provide all the citations, but a lot of the work that I was referring to is from Leroy Little Bear, Manulani Alulimeyer, Sean Wilson. And then since I've been here on these lands, I'm just really trying to learn the language, which has been a very, very slow and not very successful process because of other reasons. But then I co-teach a course on land-based, a resurgence of Indigenous epistemologies and land-based learning. It's a master's course. And so I'm really actually grateful to say in our room today, there's one of my former co-teachers who did teach me so much about Indigenous ways of knowing and being on the land, and that's Ted Godfredson, who's here. And then also Ted's uncle, Gary Godfredson, who when I came here was the Indigenous cultural advisor at Thompson Rivers University. And so together with another friend who's also friends with Monica, Gloria Ramirez, and Nicole Chavez, who's not Indigenous, but who has worked closely with Art Manuel. So that's, I think, that the process of trying to really explain how so many of the ideas that seems new to cognitive scientists and epistemologists really are foundational positions amongst the Secwepemc people, the Siksikapi, and the Inuit, where I'm from. So that's sort of, I get that to make those connections. Did that answer your question?
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for that insight. I have a question. I just didn't want to put myself at top of the question list, but I have a question, and it's for Jenna, and it has to do with that the origins of the Cartesian ontology, epistemology, and some of the scholars that I have been following from the decolonial South American perspective, Enrique Dussel, Aníbal Quijano, Walter Mignolo. And what Enrique Dussel specifically says is that that Cartesian way of thinking that is very much at the basis of the modern epistemologies, colonial epistemologies, trying to be all universalistic. What he says is, well, Descartes lived, correct me if I'm wrong, in the 1600s. Before that, it was 1492 when the Americas were Europeans found the Americas, and they say they discovered them, but they were already discovered for a long time. And how that clash and that getting in there and taking over created, before the ego cogito, the I think therefore I am, it created the I conquer therefore I am, and it created this entity with so much power. And then kind of, because of all those emancipatory forces of modernity, kind of conquered, created the conquering self, the straight white male colonizer that became the model for the individual, and then kind of hid it or it became hidden in the modern ethos of enlightenment and morality, but that has this hidden, also Maldonado Torres, who says it has this hidden agenda of rape, pillaging, murder, and is all embedded in the creation of the individualist Western self, but it's hidden in that colonial matrix of power that Aníbal Quijano calls. So I was wondering what your take is on this. To me, it seems like they're saying, well, this happened before, and so therefore it became part and then kind of became hidden. But what would you say to this critique of that individual self?
So first, great question, really interesting as well. And I'll say two things. One is that the presupposition of power is absolutely central to the autonomy that is at the center of, whoops, excuse me. To the autonomy, let me just stop that. That's at the center of the I, right? The cogito autonomy. So that power gets manifested and then reconstituted. So I think most assuredly there is the center of individualism and power that can be seen as a conquering I, as it were. And I have read that source because you recommended it a little while ago. So I will say that a lot that goes into the individualism and the separation of nature is also inherited through the philosophical tradition, right? So we can trace what Descartes says, we can trace it pretty clearly back to Plato and a lot of the stories that are told that bring up Platonic metaphysics are then reconstituted in a Catholic light through the Cartesian framework. So there's that like historical root that we see Descartes' epistemology and metaphysics kind of borrowing from that precursor. But I wanted to just mention also in connection with yours a wonderful other critique of the Cartesian eye that comes from Charles Mills and his non-Cartesian sums, right? And one of the things that Charles Mills criticizes in the criticisms that he raises is that the presupposition of identity, of personhood, is something that only someone with political and cultural power could have. Right. And he contrasts this with the Ellisonian, he contrasts the Cartesian self with the Ellisonian self. And the Ellisonian self is someone whose personhood isn't secure because it's constantly questioned by the eyes that see a Black man or a Black woman, not as a person at all. And so that, I think, is a really poignant and important critique of the Cartesian ego, the Cartesian self as well, is that, you know, for people whose personhood isn't ingrained in the cultural fabric, like, for example, women and Indigenous people and Black people, the presupposition that you couldn't doubt anything, you could doubt anything except for that you exist, you are a person, it's simply not the case, right? So that's, I think, a really powerful cultural critique from Charles Mills, the Black philosopher. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. I see your hand up, Chris.
Yeah, although if anyone else wants to ask anything, I'm just all excited. But and I wanted to build off of what Jenna is saying and ask Melody and maybe also Zoltan, given that we're talking about the relational formation of the self, like Melody, you describe having some difficulty getting your students to acknowledge the harm of jokes in a relational way. Have you tried, or would it be useful to try, walking all the way back to asking them to identify how their own selfhood is relationally constituted, and then kind of work forward from there? And likewise for Zoltan, like with your exercise, do you then use that exercise to get students to rethink their conception of self?
Yeah, I can riff on that first. Yeah, I found that when I was struggling with this question, and I will say that part of it had to do with the students not really doing their readings, but that's not an excuse, to be honest. So yeah, I at some moment I realized that we needed to do a reshift and really work again to get them thinking in terms of how relations are constantly constituting, and that it's not the case that things are kind of just static and sitting within a particular interaction. And so I did actually find that at one point I gave them a positionality exercise as well, where, what did I make them do? They essentially, there's actually only 4 people in this class, which makes it a little bit harder as well. So I had 2 people go outside the classroom and 2 people stay in the classroom, and I got them to talk about how something about their positionality, I apologize, I can't remember, essentially how or whether they had encountered something in their lives that had shifted their perspective of the world, and what was it about their past that had shaped them into the person that they are now. And that actually got them to think a little bit deeper and more effectively about these questions of, you know, how do our interactions shape us? How do these, you know, seemingly fleeting moments end up contributing to something bigger? And so, yeah, so I think that just to, I guess, reaffirm that instinct, I think that positionality exercises in many of the classes that I've played them out have always gone really well and have made students think in ways that they perhaps haven't thought of before or in a long time, and that we as scholars tend to take for granted, I suppose. You'll probably notice that throughout the as I flew through this set of slides here, there is one positionality exercise that is, have you witnessed or experienced any effects of positionality on you or on other folks? And also a question I like to propose is what ingredients are composing this positionality that you've noticed on someone else or that you've noticed in yourself? What are all of those factors that are coming in together to relate to produce the situation that we're in right now? And yeah, in every class that it is deployed, it ends up getting them pretty deeply thinking. So I think that that is a potential good way forward.
Yeah. So the question was whether or not I've been successful in transforming the way students see themselves, their own background, as it were. Correct, Chris? Huh?
Yeah, like not only how they see themselves, but how they think of what it is to be a self. If you take
what is it? Yeah. Let me preface what I'm going to say the following way. It's been my experience that whenever I return from a hike that long, I mean, a full day hike, I always kind of feel some sort of transformation in my own self, the way I see the world. The very fact of being cut off from the the fabric of the urban context is in and of itself helps a lot. Now, to your question, it's a yes. I mean, it's not mandatory, so this is not. So I'm not saying that the full class is showing up, but more than 50% tend to show up, and despite the fact that for a non-insignificant portion of them, it's also a tremendous physical challenge, or precisely because it's a challenge, it's transformative. For example, because we have the full day ahead of us, and also toward the very end, we go to a restaurant, eat dinner together, and so on and so on. And it gives occasion, for example, to discuss what whiteness means, how fluid the boundaries, how non-obvious, how non-evident this category of white is. For example, speaking of the illustration I gave, the ethnic Germans expelled from Hungary got to be seen as non-white upon arrival in Germany, because they were coming from outside Germany. Also, the Germans repatriated, this is not the correct word. A lot of Germans got to be expelled from Russia, at least 2 million in the wake of World War II. They were not seen as white by, Germans within Germany. They were portrayed as closer to the Roma, to gypsies, precisely because they were coming from the east of Europe. It gives me an occasion to tell the story of the racialization of the Irish in the United States. Am I okay in saying that the Irish did not really have the full status of whiteness up until the early decades of the 20th century. They were, of course, they were not as dark as Afro-Americans in the portrayal, but they were not as white as Northern Europeans, the Brits, and so on. They were put in a racially somewhat inferior category. So this is possible, and so rethinking the concept of whiteness and starting not to take granted things that they've been taking for granted for a long time. Yeah, it's been useful.
perhaps also with taken for granted with the substantialist views of right of categories of people, what Melody was sharing. I'm realizing that we have a few minutes left, but I wanted to make a little comment on pedagogical, since I'm hearing everyone and very much appreciating, for example, the way that Jenna presented and position and shared her own positionality. How I have found that personal stories used in the classroom for specific objectives. What I find as a sociologist and teaching about race and gender and positionality and intersectionality as well, how personal stories of experiencing racism or experiencing or feeling shame because of certain things that you learned and then you had to unlearn. Yesterday, I went to a panel with what they called women leaders of my university, and I felt very honored to be invited to that panel with a couple of more deans and a vice president of TRU World. Anyways, it was so interesting because everyone started sharing their stories, and so the night became a night of sharing stories in which one of the women that was speaking was saying she experienced racism in the sense that she doesn't have an accent yet. Once she presented herself to a job, they were being seen as not the person they were expecting because of that lack of accent. And then I related that to my own story, and that those borders you were mentioning, Sultan, as being quite fluid with the whiteness or non-whiteness, because Shakil Chowdhury in his Deep Diversity book taught me that one can grow up in very white spaces, which is my experience. I grew up in private schools in Mexico, and that those white spaces, just like Shakil Chowdhury of I think Indian descent, was sharing, he grew up pretending that he was white, and that was my experience as well. And in a way, telling the story helps me heal in that relationality from those assumptions, but also helps people understand how it is that these fluid borders are not essentialist, are not substances, not the color of the skin that one has even, right? And so that, I think, is very, you can forefront that with radical relationism. Sorry, Melody, you have your hand up.
Yeah, no, what you were talking about made me excited in terms of some other observations that I've made in terms of the effectiveness of storytelling, and also of being honest with students and getting them to talk comfortably about their positionality. And that's one thing that I've noticed is a little different from teaching in Toronto versus teaching in rural Pennsylvania. Is, in my Toronto classes, I'd be like, hey everybody, like, I'm really white, and let's talk about it, and let's position all of ourselves in relation to these things. And now when I do that here, I'll be like, yeah, I'm super white, and this is like, all of these things, and it's a different reaction. It's a different, even though most of the students are also white. But in terms of, so yeah, I like this idea of bringing ourselves as educators in to these reconsiderations of self and whiteness in ways that don't allow them to take these categories for granted. This is also something I say all the time. It's like, let's not take these categories for granted. And in terms of storytelling, I remember at one point telling, I think I've told this a couple times in class, I went to a plantation in Tennessee that is now like a winery and a museum. And I talked about the experience of, being there in my whiteness amidst a lot of older white people, and the way that history was framed, and then coming into contrast and with seeing these fields and fields that were cotton fields, and then seeing the way that this house was presented, the colonial mansion of Andrew Jackson. And I found that even while I'm telling this story, putting these images up of the plantation, of the vastness of the land, and getting them to imagine, you know, the labor and the materiality and the humanity that went into maintaining this physical geographic space under slavery is a very effective mechanism of teaching, and it also gets us to talk explicitly about our whiteness in those moments, and how race was, you know, as I talked about, constructed via the priorities of a capitalist colonial structure. So yeah, anyway, what you were saying just got me excited about, you know, the capacity of talking about our positionality and our constructedness and our whiteness in getting our students to not take these things for granted, especially ones that are coming from contexts where they have not really talked about race at all before in their whiteness. So yeah.
Thank you so much. I don't see any hands up. I'm gonna bring us to a close. Oh, Zoltan, you have a final comment?
Just final thing to Melody's point is that I also make it a point to explain to the students that Hungary has been becoming this fashionable country among Western far-right folks, a lot of whom migrate here to set up shop and live here because Hungary, Poland, the Czech Republic, Slovakia are among the whitest countries on earth. And precisely because they have this frustration with, you know, what they call the woke-ish culture, woke totalitarianism, and so on and so on. They see this part of Europe, Central Europe, as the few remaining places where you have close to 100% whiteness. You know, they take take the tube, the underground, and all the folks they're surrounded with are white people. They don't see any dark face, and so we're kind of becoming fashionable among white supremacists. And this is a thing we already start seeing the effects of this among students. For some reason, students raised here, born to American parents. It's interesting.
That is a thing, that whole backlash towards what people react to as the woke culture. All of that is, it's fascinating, and it's also very scary. So radical relationism can do, we can put our contribution there to counter those trends, and to make this a more loving world. And we didn't manage to get to the compassion bit, but thank you everyone so much. Thank you so much for your contributions and your efforts. And I'm gonna stop the recording right now.